At a fundamental level, there are just two religions, or two kinds of religions, I should say. In the first kind, there is the idea of God. God is the ultimate ideal, and you pursue the path of goodness to reach there, to get to the God. These are also known as Abrahamic religions, and most of them, they trace their origins to the Arab countries, such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. On the other hand, when we come to India, the tradition here follows the other path. That is, you don't look towards God, but you look inwards, and then you search within, the search of the divine. And eventually, in some cases, in some philosophies, they would tell you that's how you get to the God. And in some philosophies, such as Buddhism, they say by looking inward, you find nirvana, you find ultimate peace. So, most of the religions which originated in India, they followed this path, that of looking inward rather than towards the God. Although many would agree or argue that it's eventually the same. By looking inward, you are trying to get to the path of the God. And that's where this discussion gets really interesting. And that's why I'm going to discuss today the book called Indian Religions, written by Dr Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, who was a scholar, a philosopher, and also the former president of India. And I quite like how he began this book. And the first chapter is called The Need for Religion. And in the first chapter itself, he doesn't say, he doesn't raises the argument of atheism. He doesn't say that, you have the choice between religion and non-religion or atheism. He argues that you're going to have some religion. Whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, but eventually you are going to have some religion, and it's up to you which religion you're going to choose. So for example, if you believe in the idea of human rights, then you believe in that, right? It's not an objective fact. The idea of that every human being, irrespective of their race or gender, should have equal rights. There is no scientific basis for that. If you're going to believe in it, that's going to be your religion. So in spite of whether you associate with any religion or not, you're going to follow some religion in one way or the other. And entirely it's up to you. How do you associate with it? Are you aware of it or not? Are you consciously following it or not? And more importantly, these modern secular religions where you talk about humanism in most cases, you're not sure about the origins. You're not sure about the roots of where do these rights, where do these noble virtues, where do they come from? So they're not really grounded in those complex myths in which the other religions, the other religious traditions, they are rooted. So that's the kind of argument he makes in the first chapter, and from there on he begins to talk about the idea of Indian religions and how different Indian religions started with this thought of looking inward and seeking the truth, and ultimately that leads to the salvation. And he also talks about the other side of the religions, which are the Abrahamic religions, where you pursue the idea of one God, and how these two religions ultimately are giving you the same message. And more importantly, how the followers of these different religions, these different and sometimes contradictory ideologies, they can live together in peace, how they can reconcile. And then he talks about different religions, Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, and he tells how the beginning of these different ideas of Indian religions, it comes from Hinduism. And that does not mean there are not differences. There are quite significant differences in these religions. But nevertheless, we can go back to the roots and understand these religions. And he writes some interesting passages about these different religions and how their core teachings can in fact bring us together. So let me read some of these passages which I think are going to help you if you want to understand these religions, and more importantly, if you want to build a common thread among all these religions, whether they started in Arabia or India. So about Buddhism, Dr. Radhakrishnan says, the Buddha recognizes diverse ways to reach the truth. But when the truth is attained, the way falls away. One need not insist that it is the only way to reach the truth. The Buddha gives us the parable of the raft. Any person who wishes to cross a dangerous river, having built a raft for this purpose, would indeed be a fool if, when he had crossed, he were to put the raft on his shoulders and take it with him on his journey. In China, when the followers of Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism meet and exalt their own religion, they conclude with the chorus, religions are many, reason is one, and we are all brothers. So I think that's really a profound thought, that it's a path. You have to walk sincerely upon it. You have to be focused. You have to pursue that path. But you cannot get obsessed with it. You have to realize it's a path, it's not the destination. And I think that's really an interesting and beautiful message. And so often while we are pursuing religions, we get obsessed with the particular brand of religion. But that's not really an important thing, the most important thing rather. It is still a path, and there can be many paths. And that's something, this idea of pluralism, that you can have different paths. You find that in almost all the religious traditions in India, be it Buddhism or Hinduism, Jainism. And then the author turns to the Abrahamic faiths and talks about the Bible and the Quran and tells us how we can connect with other religions, even if we don't come from them. How we can build these common threads, and which can go a long way in weaving peace and harmony among the people of different religions. So let me quote a passage in which the author is talking about the Judaism. He says, the Jewish Bible does not begin with the Jews. It starts with the story of Adam, which in Hebrew means man. Genesis says this is the book of the generations of man. It does not speak of the Levite, the priest, or the Jew, but of men. The children of earth are viewed as one family. They have one ancestor who is the father of all. Distinctions of caste and class differentiation by blood or descent do not supersede the primary fact of human equality. Why was man created one? Ask the rabbis, and answer is, in order that no man should say to another, my father was greater than yours. And since according to the Bible, the man was created in the image of the God, that tells you something. This idea transcends all the discriminations and all the inequalities that exist in the world. The fact that there is something divine in each individual, that's really profound, and that should not divide people, rather bring them together. Similarly, when we talk about Islam, we get a similar message. And in Quran, God says that there is not a people, but a warner has gone among them. And every nation had a messenger, and every nation had a guide. And certainly, we raised in every nation a messenger. So the idea here is, once again, in different cultures, traditions, regions, there were different messengers of the God. And of course, they delivered the same message, but in different ways. And that's the idea here. Nobody has to be or pretend to be better than the others. You don't have to fight as long as you agree on the ground rules which talk about peace and harmony. To recognize the divine in another human being and respect them. That's the core message that we should derive, and we should remind ourselves, no matter which religion, which idea we are pursuing. Because if we keep forgetting those core ideas, then we are really straying off the path. So this is how he talks about different religions and how they share common ideas. And then in details, he talks about the ideas of Indian religious thought and the ideas of Hinduism, and how religious experience in general, how that affects you, how that changes you. So once again, I'm going to read a few passages from these subsequent chapters, and you will see how beautifully he puts forward the idea of religions or religious experience or spirituality. The effort of religion is to enable man to realize the divine in him, not merely as a formula or a proposition, but as the central fact of his being, by growing into oneness with it. The way to reach this religious experience cannot be prescribed. The soul of man, whose nature is infinite, has unlimited possibilities in it. The God whom it seeks is equally infinite and wide. The reactions of an infinite soul to an infinite environment cannot be reduced to limited forms. The Hindu thinkers recognize that the exhaustless variety of life cannot be confined to fixed molds. A familiar text declares, "As the bird floats in the air, as the fish swims in the sea, leaving no traces behind, even so are the paths to God traversed by the seekers of spirit." In one of these passages, the author also describes that the idea of dharma, the idea of moksha, samsara, all these interesting ideas that you find in the Eastern philosophy. So let me read a few lines from these passages so that you'll understand these terms. The term dharma is one of complex significance. It stands for all those ideals and purposes, influences and institutions that shape the character of man, both as an individual and as a member of society. It is the law of right living, the observance of which secures the double object of happiness on earth and salvation. It is ethics and religion combined. Moksha, also known as the spiritual freedom, is the aim of all human life. It is the destiny of man to reach the summits of spirit and attain immortality. The eternal dream of the human heart, the aspiration of the soul to come to its own, is the basis of the Hindu Dharma. While the spiritual perfection of man is the aim of all endeavor, the Hindu Dharma does not insist on any religious belief or form of worship. The utmost latitude is allowed in the matter of addressing and approaching the Supreme. The Hindu thinkers were good students of philosophy and sociology and never felt called upon to enforce religious belief. Then, towards the end of the book, Dr. Radhakrishnan also talks about the Arabian religions, how they arrived in India, and what happens when their philosophies, their ideas, they touched Indian people. What influences did they have? And it's really interesting to read, keeping aside the politics, keeping aside all those things, but just purely talking about it in theological terms and the impact of religion on an individual. So there are two chapters. One is Islam and Indian thought, and then the subsequent chapter is the Christianity and Indian thought. So let me read a couple of passages from each of these chapters where you will get the idea of how these different religions, they affected the native religions of India. Islam is a religion without mystery. Its simplicity is its strength and beauty. It does not indulge in any theological subtleties, supernatural paradoxes, or metaphysical pretensions. It is natural religion with one central principle, that God makes, upholds, governs, and perfects all things. This serene, lofty theism is best suited for the simple-minded. On its institutional side, it is perfectly rational. It has no caste or priest, requires no sacrifice or ceremonial, recognizes no ritual likely to distract the mind from the thought of one God. So in one of the passages he writes, man is made in the image of God and so is not naturally depraved. As we now find him, he is no doubt handicapped in several ways. These defects are foreign to his true nature and are the result of his abuse of freedom. As the Hebrew story goes, of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. This idea endorses the Hindu view that sorrow and suffering consequent on sin and stupidity are produced by man, although God allowed them when he gave us freedom. God, as we saw, does not deal with us as a potter with clay, but gave us full freedom to realize our destiny. But man loved his false self and not his true self and source, that is God, and therefore evil arose. Our sinfulness, however, does not destroy the immortal glory that is our heritage, though it postpones its arrival. So while he does discuss these ideas where we can build common understanding of God, of religion, where we can come together from different religions and build brotherhood. He also highlights how the different interpretations of religions and how different doctrines and their understandings, and in most cases misunderstandings, they have created confusion and in some cases hatred among the people. And this is what we should avoid. We should focus on what's the core message. What are we trying to achieve? Where are we trying to get? When we ask ourselves these fundamental questions, we understand the fundamentals, the very fundamentals of a religion. Then it brings out the goodness in us. And that's something which you find in the Bhakti tradition, even in Sikhism. The Sikh scriptures, as you know, they recognize these poets of Bhakti tradition and mention their verses. And that's what happened in India. When all these religions came and eventually people went to the basics of the idea of God, just pure divinity. And there arose this beautiful idea of oneness. And the Sufi poets and Bhakti poets, all these ideas, they emerged and they pretty much have shaped the Indian conscious. So that's all for today. We'll continue our discussion from a new book when the next time we meet. Thank you.